Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Alan, can you take us to the next screen?
Sure.
Great. Thank you all for joining us. We're very excited to have everybody here today. Today, we're going to talk about Irma's approval process for audit firms who are approved to conduct Irma audits. We're going to do a quick round of introductions for myself and Marnie Bamert of ASI. We'll do some housekeeping for the meeting so that you all know how to use all the functions. We're going to tell you a little bit about Irma because I know that some people who've registered are probably new to Irma, and it will be a very quick overview of the Irma standard and the process and what makes Irma audits different. I will then hand it over to ASI, and they're going to review the oversight process, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. There is a Q&A feature built into the Zoom call. Oh, actually, Alan, I'm going to hand it over to you to do logistics.
Thank you, Michelle. So we are going to use the Q&A tool at the bottom. So please, when you have questions at any point during the webinar, put them in Q&A, and our panelists will address them at the end of the session. Back to you.
Great. And then if you could just stay on mute, right, until we get to the end as well.
That is correct. Yes. Please stay on mute.
All right. Great. Well, thank you. I'm going to start with what makes Irma different. One of the unique things about Irma is that we have equal governing authority. And I'm going to get into a slide here in a little bit and explain to you what that means. But we have a very diverse board, which directs Irma. And this ensures that we create value for all stakeholders that are associated with the mining process, whether it be mines themselves, the communities around them that are impacted, NGOs that are monitoring impacts on communities, purchasers, investors, and the workers that work at the mining companies. Irma has very detailed requirements. We'll go into more detail than that. We're more detailed than any other standard out there with the level of detail. And we comprehensively cover a wide range of environmental, social, and governance issues. The Irma standard can be used in any country. It can be used for any kind of ore that's mined, any type of mine, whether it be underground, above ground. So it really is intended to be a standard for all. The Irma audit is also a transparent process. From the beginning, we announce audits are taking place. Prior to the actual on-site audit, there's another announcement that invites stakeholders to engage in the process, and then we transparently share the reports. It's also a very inclusive audit process. We not only interview mine management and the subject experts at mines, but we interview workers, we interview contractors, we interview community members, we interview public officials to get a very full perspective on the mine's performance. And then finally, our reports are very detailed, and those reports are published. Next. As mentioned, we have a multi-stakeholder board, as you can see here. We have equal representation from mining, purchasing, NGOs, organized labor, affected communities, and then the investor and finance sector. And in this equitable governance model, any one of these sectors is able to stop the process if both representatives from that sector don't agree with the proposal within the Irma system. They can stop the process, and then we go back and we work on it until we get to a point where we have agreement across the houses. Ellen? I'm not going to read off all of these, but it's just to give you an idea that within those same sectors, as well as the processors working group, we have lots of organizations that are out there in the world that are supporting Irma, that are asking for Irma, that are asking minds to participate in Irma, and that are supporting the mission of Irma. Next, Alan. Right now, we have 100 sites that are participating in the Irma process. That includes 78 mining companies, as you can see here. That represents many, many minerals across almost 30 countries around the world. Some of these sites are in the self-assessment process. Some of them are piloting the draft standards, which we released several years ago. And we have a total of 18 who have formally engaged in the independent assessment process. And here's what that looks like on the map. So you can see that we're in every continent except for down south. Next. Okay, a little bit about the Irma standard. The Irma standard for responsible mining came out in 2018. It took about 10 years for us to get to that standard. It was developed through a robust multi-stakeholder process, meaning that we had a number of global public consultations. We received many comments. We actively sought feedback from representation from a variety of stakeholder groups. We field tested the standard several times, made corrections to that. We engaged many experts in a variety of working groups, and the standard now serves as a detailed roadmap for what best practice looks like in mining. We have recently, as an aside, released a revised draft of our standard that came out in October, and we set a 90-day comment period, excuse me, which is open until January. So we welcome all of you to go to that revised draft standard. It's on our website, review it, and provide us comments. We welcome comments from all. Next, Alan, thank you. So just a quick look, when we developed the Irma standard, we developed it using existing documents, guidance, policies, principles as a source of information for the Irma standard. So everything pretty much that's in the Irma standard already exists somewhere in guidance information that has been adopted and put forth by other organizations, as you can see here. Next. So this is how the Irma standard is broken down. We have 4 main principles. These are business integrity, social responsibility, planning for positive legacies, and environmental responsibility. Within each of these principles, we have separate chapters that cover different subjects. There's a total of 26 chapters. And within these chapters, then there can be anywhere from 6 to 30 or so requirements. Great. So that is a very, very, very brief overview of the Irma standard. The Irma standard is available on our website. There's also a guidance document available on our website, along with that draft standard that's been released. So if you do have questions about that, we absolutely invite you to go to the website and review those documents. Because this meeting is about the assurance process, though, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what does the Irma assurance process look like. So this is a quick overview of the timeline for the Irma process. It begins in the pre-audit phase with sites deciding to enter in to the process by conducting a self-assessment. Self-assessments are conducted using an online tool that Irma sponsors. It includes every requirement that's in the Irma standard. It allows sites to go through, critically self-assess their performance, identify gaps, work on those gaps, and work towards a point where they're comfortable in entering the independent audit process. Once they've decided to move towards independent assessment, there's an application process, there's a participation agreement and a fee that's paid. Sites then can sign contracts with audit firms. We currently have 2 approved audit firms. The purpose of this presentation is to tie into an invitation that we put out earlier this year, inviting more audit firms to participate in the Irma process. There's an increased need for auditors to be available to audit against the standard. And that's why we're expanding the number of audit firms. The audit team is presented to Irma as well as part of that pre-audit process. We review the team and the plan and either provide feedback or provide approval. Once those things are underway and the site's ready to move on to start the audit process, there is a public announcement. This public announcement typically occurs electronically, so it'll go on websites. Goes on the Irma website. It goes on the audit firm's website. Oftentimes, the Mind also will announce it, and it goes on our blog and our newsletter for Irma. The stage 1 desktop audit is the first stage of the audit process. In this step, the auditors review the information that's been entered into the self-assessment tool, which includes the site's own rating of their performance, along with a rationale, and then any evidence they choose to upload to support their rationale. It often includes interviews back and forth with personnel at the mine site. And it can include a site visit, although it doesn't often include that, but that's certainly an option. Really critical piece that also happens during this early stage is stakeholder engagement planning. Stakeholder engagement is a really significant part of the Irma audit. And so that happens in that early phase, as well as the actual on-site audit, which we refer to as the stage 2 audit. After the audit is completed, there is a reporting cycle. There's a draft report that is prepared that's reviewed by both Irma and the mine site with feedback. The site has the option of entering a corrective action period, which delays the publication of the report so that they can work on certain gaps that have been identified during the audit. And then finally, there's an assignment of an achievement level. The audit's finalized and we release the public report. There is a surveillance audit that occurs 12 to 18 months after the release of that first report, and then a re-verification audit, which has to be completed within 36 months of that. We have a very detailed timeline on our website that you can find more information on this. Alan? Great. We often get questions about how much does an Irma audit cost? And as you can imagine, our answer is often it depends. But generally, Irma audits range between about $120,000 and $180,000. In addition to that, you would have travel expenses. You may have extra costs for technical experts that you may need to bring in, for interpreters. If the site decides to use some extra time to do corrective actions, there could be additional work spent on verification of the corrective actions. And then there's report translation fees as well. Some of the things that affect the cost would be the where the audit is, the size of the mine, the complexity of the operations, the scope of the audit. Under the Irma process, sites could choose to audit themselves against only 1 or 2 chapters, for instance. The type of mine obviously can also have an effect. For those of you who are familiar with the International Accreditation Forms MD5 guidance document, which provides a tool for estimating effort, we have found that tool consistently delivers an estimate for at least the environmental and health and safety portions of the Irma audit. to kind of get an understanding of what an Irma audit takes. It doesn't, obviously that document doesn't include social auditing, so you do have to extrapolate, but I just reference that as a useful tool for those of you who are coming into this process brand new and are trying to understand how you would scope an Irma audit. Next.
Michelle, we also had the question of whether it's an audit or a verification. Could you speak to that and the differences between it? And I'm not sure if the person asking the question was asking a specific question on it. And so please feel free. You can actually unmute yourself if you want or type into the chat, but otherwise, Michelle, maybe you want to comment to it.
Sure. And I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the report, what the report looks like at the end, which might answer that question. But
yeah, feel free to take it in context. Yeah, feel free to take it in context if you like as well.
Yep. It's a it's a good question, and I have a feeling that those two words maybe mean something in particular to the person who's asking the question. Our auditors do perform an audit against a set of requirements. And as part of the audit, they are asked to provide an opinion on whether a site does not meet, partially meets, substantially meets, or fully meets all the requirements. So an Irma requirement could be a simple statement, requiring that they have, let's say, a policy, or it could be more complicated, where it might say you need to have a policy, and the policy has to contain this content, and it has to be signed, and it has to be implemented and understood by the workforce, let's say. And so all of those things are expected to be reviewed and verified and audited. I'm just going to use both of those words. And then the auditors provide documentation of evidence that they reviewed against that. And I'll get to this later, but approximately 35 to 40%, I think, of our requirements require that the auditors actually seek verification from parties other than the mine itself. So it could be from workers, it could be from community stakeholders, government officials, and other stakeholders. So I hope that has answered your question. If not, we can circle back maybe at the end and explore that a little bit more. This is just a quick overview of the auditors and the requirements. In our CB requirements, which are available on our website, we have a detailed summary of our auditor qualification and competence expectations. But in a nutshell, auditors need to have meaningful experience in the mining and minerals sector. They should be experienced auditors. These are pretty complex audits. They're not well suited for entry-level auditors. The auditor should have experience in the subject area that they're auditing. Again, going back to that list of chapters, there's 26 chapters, and each one of those requires some expertise in the audit team to review. There are occasions where you will find you have to augment your team with technical experts. For instance, you may have a great audit team set up, but you need particular expertise in tailings. So your team could include a technical expert that's going to guide you on a particular area. Auditors should be familiar with international standards. We have additional requirements for those lead auditors. And we will be providing training. We'll talk a little bit about training coming up. We also have very specific requirements around conflict of interest. Our audit firms and our auditors need to make sure that there's no self-interest, that they're not reviewing their own auditing or not reviewing their own work or the work that's been performed by their firm. There shouldn't be any familiarity, current or past personal or professional relationships with the site. And then, of course, we don't want there to be any evidence of threats of coercion or anything else where there's intimidation that would influence the outcome of an audit. Next. Okay. This is an overview of how Irma builds trust with our stakeholders. It requires independence, it requires rigor, it requires extensive engagement. And there's a lot here, but I've highlighted, you can see in the boxes that are outlined in red, the pieces of Irma audit that tend to be unique or different from many of the other audits that you might be accustomed to. First of all, in our overall approval process for audit firms, we do witness audits, meaning that somebody from Irma or somebody from ASI could be present to observe the audit firm in action. We also have an annual review process. We have a grievance process that we offer to stakeholders and to mines and to you. We also ask that you, as the audit firm, also have a grievance process that allows mines or stakeholders to reach out and provide feedback as well. In our multi-stage audit process, you may recall I talked about the stage 1 desktop, the stakeholder engagement, and the stage 2. I also want to point out that there is a component of Irma audits that we ask the audit firms to do some public research for due diligence on the site, looking for evidence of, a history of conflict or support or challenge, and then that helps to inform the scope of the audit. It can also help inform who needs to be engaged with during the audit, which stakeholders would be good to reach out to. So it does require very careful due diligence. And then the stakeholder identification and outreach planning also requires a fair amount of time. Again, building on that public information due diligence to identify who are the stakeholders, what's the best way to engage with them. These audits can take place anywhere in the world, and each community in which our auditors engage have unique requirements for having successful stakeholder engagement. In some cases, that might be really using social media for outreach. In some cases, it might be boots on the ground, needing to reach out in order to identify folks who want to engage. Sometimes stakeholder engagement during the audit is door-to-door knocking. Sometimes it's holding public meetings. Sometimes it's meeting with public officials in their offices. So it's a fairly extensive part of the audit. As mentioned before, 35 to 40% of the Irma requirements need stakeholder input per the Irma standard, and that's why that part of the audit is so significant. We define a minimum number of formal worker interviews. It can range anywhere from 25 to over 60, let's say, interviews, depending on the number of workers, including contractors that a mine has. And then there's independent verification against each requirement. So every requirement gets a rating and a rationale from the audit firm. And there's 420 requirements in our standard. And then finally, the fact that these reports are transparent, they're published, they are written not for the mine site, but for a global audience, which again is a different approach from what you will find with most audits. Next. And speaking of those reports, this is the summary of the types of audit reports that can come from audits. And this is just summarizing, where does Irma fit into those? So Irma is a site level conformity report, meaning that these audits are done for each site. The outcomes are reported on an individual site level, not at a corporate level. And we do provide a rating and a rationale for the site's performance on a scale, again, as I mentioned before, where it is, partially meets, substantially meets, fully meets, does not meet, on every single requirement. Different from reports that report only exceptions, like a non-conformity report or an exception report. Different from what you might find in a report assurance statement, where somebody reviews a statement that the mine has provided and then provides assurance to the accuracy of that statement. Also, obviously very different from a self-assessment report where a site would report on their own performance. Next. Irma has 4 levels of recognized achievement that result from a combination of the site's performance against 40 critical requirements that are embedded in the standard, as well as their overall performance in each chapter and each principle. Next, Alan. And so finally, these are just a few slides here that I want to wrap up with on where to get more information. If you're looking for documents about the assurance process itself, if you go to the Irma website, under the resources tab, you're going to choose auditor, or go to resources for auditors and choose auditor documents. And there you will find the assessment manual for mines, which provides details about the process. You will find reporting templates to see what is provided in terms of the reports. There's a guidance to the mine measure tool, which is how the sites do their self-assessment, certification body requirements, the oversight procedure that Marnie is going to review, and other documents there. So a very useful place to go. You'll also find frequently asked questions under the tab that says Become an Irma Independent Auditor. Alan, if you could take us to the next slide. And I'm looking at time, and I want to make sure that we have time for Q&A. But very quickly, these questions are on our website, this and the next slide, and they are answered in more detail. So I'm going to hand it over to Marnie.
And Michelle, before you go to Marnie, because you had a slide up there about the achievement levels, and it occurred to us that possibly the question on auditing is an audit versus verification. It might be a question related to certification. So you don't use the word certified anywhere here on this slide. And can you speak to verifying performance and your achievement levels versus certification?
Excellent. Yes, absolutely. So Irma used to use the word certification, and we have since stopped using that term. And the reason for this is because we're not certifying performance against a minimum standard. We are measuring performance against a best practice standard. And that means that a site could achieve, a score of 23% in a chapter. And the next time they're audited at their re-verification audit, they can show progress, where they've moved up to 48% or 52%. So we're really not certifying sites because, part of the Irma process is to really promote continuous improvement. And what we want to do is to be able to share transparently what the site's actual performance is, and then be able to track improvement over time. Okay. Amy, I know you're watching questions, and Alan, is there anything that we should be addressing before we move on to Marnie?
There is a question about whether there's a time constraint and I think this is for auditors who want to serve as an Irma auditor in the future on their past working relationship with a particular mine. So can you audit a given mine depending on whether or not you've had some professional association with that mine previously?
I'm going to answer that, and then I have a feeling that Marnie is also probably going to provide some comment on that. But we do expect our audit firms to be independent audit firms. And if you're not accredited to ISO 17021 or 17065, we've now added an option to have a more rigorous audit done by ASI to verify that you have all the management systems in place that would reflect the same as the site that is, or as an audit firm that is accredited. And part of that accreditation system is that you have a process for managing and assessing conflict of interest. And so I think that ASI would be reviewing that system to determine if it is sufficient. And
Thank
with
you,
that,
Michelle.
I will hand over to Marnie.
Thank you so much. My name is Marnie Bammert. I'm a project manager with Assurance Services International, short ASI. And just to add to what Michelle said regarding the last question, I think there's a requirement in the Irma CB requirements that says that there must be a cooling off period of 3 years. So if you've done consultancy with a mine site in the past 3 years, you cannot audit that mine site. That's to avoid conflict of interest and impartiality risks. And with that, I'll take it forward. So I'll briefly introduce you to the approval process that we have defined in the Irma procedure for oversight of certification bodies. If you could move to the next slide, Ellen, please. But very briefly, for those of you who don't know us, ASI is the sole assurance partner for some of the world's most recognized and actually also oldest voluntary sustainability systems. We work across many different sectors: aquaculture, fisheries, forestry, but also agriculture, textiles, jewelry, protected areas, and mining, now with Irma. And we have different arrangements with our partners. In some, we have quite wide-ranging decision-making agreements with them. So we would impose non-conformities, for example, we would impose sanctions, we would decide upon approval, but also rejection of approval of certification bodies. And with others, like with Irma, we usually make recommendations on issues related to oversight and assurance. We do advise our partners on how their schemes might develop and might evolve over time. We look into integrity risks that can threaten the credibility of a scheme. We also serve as a knowledge hub. So we provide training and knowledge exchange with our partners and stakeholders. If you move to the next slide, Ellen, please. We've been working with Irma for 6 years now already. So in the beginning, we advised on the certification body requirements and also on the governance arrangements of the Irma program. And more recently, we have developed together with Irma the procedure for oversight of certification bodies, which was launched initially last year in May. And we have since then received feedback from interested auditing firms that would like to get approved for the Irma program, but because they're not accredited, they couldn't do so up until today. And with the view to opening up the Irma program for a broader range of auditing firms, we are now in the process of revising that procedure. And the revised version hasn't been published on the website of Irma yet, but today we want to run you through the different options that we will include in that revised oversight procedure. Ellen, if you could move to the next slide, please. So we're now offering 3 different routes. The first one speaks to those certification bodies that are accredited to either ISO 17021 or ISO 17065. And for us, that would mean that we can be assured that a certification body's management system has been looked into in quite a lot of detail, usually by a national accreditation body. If they're a member of the International Accreditation Forum, that's even better. And that would mean that we as ASI could then focus in our own assessment of the certification body on crucial ISO 17021 requirements and also cover the full spectrum of the Irma requirements to appraise the CB's, the certification body's management system. Now, that is the route to approval that we already have in the oversight procedure, and we've now added 2 additional options to become approved. One is that if you're not accredited, and for some certification bodies or audit firms, this might not be an option because they might seek accreditation from a national accreditation body only for the purposes of Irma, which is probably or maybe not best used of their time and of their financial resources. We are also offering the opportunity to be assessed by ASI against 17021. And 17021, the ISO standard 17021, is the basis for the Irma CB requirements. That's why we would assess against that standard. So you could do a combined assessment against ISO 17021, the full range of those requirements and the Irma requirements. That would mean that on the one hand, of course, more effort would be spent on the ASI work. On the other hand, you would save the effort and the costs and the time to seek accreditation from a national body. There's a lot of unknowns in this whole approval process. A lot depends on really how quickly the certification body can submit all of the required information and documentation, but we estimate that the process will take between 6 to 10 months from start to finish. And both of those options shown on screen here, the two first ones, follow the same process. And we will talk about that in a little more detail. Now, the third option we have included is that a certification body or an audit firm that is not accredited and doesn't want to seek accreditation can also enter into a partnership with an approved certification body. And I'll cover that option as well in a bit more detail. It would mean that Irma audit activities are carried out according to the procedures of the other body that is approved for Irma, but that the partnering body that doesn't have accreditation would not be approved themselves. So they would have to promote their Irma services as being carried out in partnership with the approved body. So let's now talk about the approval process under the first two options here. If you move to the next slide, Ellen, please. Irma has an application form on their website that we ask certification bodies to complete and to submit to Irma together with the required documentation. And within 10 days of receipt of that application pack, Irma would do a completeness check. And if everything is there that is required, they would pass on the application pack to ASI. We then have 30 days to review the application pack and to accept or reject the applicant. One reason for rejecting an applicant might be that we feel there is fraudulent activities going on. We also do some background search, some due diligence on applicants, of course, or we find, for example, that not all legal requirements are being met. In such a case, we might reject an applicant and they might come back at a later stage. So within 30 days, we would review the application pack. And if the certification body is accepted as an applicant, we would ask you to sign an agreement, for one with us, but then also an agreement between you and Irma needs to be in place to frame the collaboration. And there's no time limit to that. If you move to the next slide, please, Ellen. The next step after this initial application phase would be the head office assessment. Again, there's no time limit to that. What ASI would do is we would send to the certification bodies a combined checklist that contains all of the ISO 17021 and all of the Irma requirements. And you would need to review all of those points in that checklist and back it up with evidence to show how you're meeting those requirements. It's quite a comprehensive checklist, so quite a bit of work needs to go into that, which is why we haven't put a time limit onto that step. Once we receive the completed the completed checklist, together with the supporting evidence, we would agree on a date for the head office assessment and on an assessment budget. And we would also send the invoice for that to you. And then as agreed, as settled on the date for the head office assessment, we would first of all conduct a desk review of the documentation you have submitted, and then also carry out a remote head office assessment to make sure that your management system seems well placed to first of all, integrate all of the ISO 17021 requirements, but also the Irma requirements over time, and that it's well placed for the Irma standard to be effectively applied. Move to the next slide, please, Ellen. After the closing meeting, within 15 days, ASI would draft an assessment report. We would do an internal technical review of that report and then send it to Irma and also to the certification body, who then has 15 days of time to review the report for any errors of fact that need correction. And once we have received the corrected report back from you, we take another 5 days to produce the final report and send it to the certification body and to Irma. Move to the next slide, please.
Marnie, you had one question that was just, and you may have answered this fully already, but maybe if you just put a bit of a highlighter pin on it about what are the crucial ISO 17021 requirements. You did speak to 17021, but made a reference to some which are crucial. And are there some that you're looking at more than others?
Okay. Well, let me put it that way. I don't think I want to go into a lot of detail on what we consider the crucial ISO 17 or 21 requirements, because we want you to meet all of the ISO 17 or 21 requirements. But the assertion that we want to have when we carry out the head office assessment is that your management system is fit for purpose for the Irma program. And looking at a specific CB, I guess it would very much depend on the specific setup of their management system of what would be considered the crucial ISO 17 or 21 requirements. So we don't want you to, just focus on certain requirements. You need to meet all of them to become Irma approved. And that's also what is stated in the CB requirements and in the Irma oversight procedure. So maybe, I know this is not a very satisfactory answer, but I would like to leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Marnie. So, and folks, if you have follow-up questions, of course, Michelle and Marnie are available to you going forward. And as they also said, for many firms, this is new in the mining space. And so we are also looking at places where if we need to approach with flexibility on something, ask that question. Don't be afraid to ask. So Marnie and Michelle are here to receive those questions and make sure that we have high quality applications coming in with firms that know mining and know the issues in the Irma standard well. So back to you, Marnie.
Thank you, Amy. Maybe to give a bit more substance. One thing that is always important is looking at impartiality. I think Michelle mentioned that earlier in her presentation, especially when we're now opening up the approval process to audit firms, where many of those audit firms also have a business unit that provides consultancy. And of course, if you provide consultancy to mine sites and you might also audit those mine sites, that creates a conflict of interest and would threaten your impartiality. So the way that you manage impartiality will be really important in that whole application and approval process. And the quality of audits really hinges on the competence of the auditors. So that's another really important point to look into, just to highlight two areas that we consider crucial in ISO and also in the Irma program. And yeah, Michelle spoke to those already. Now back to the approval process. After the head office assessment, if we've seen that a certification body has no non-conformities, they will be recommended for approval to the Irma Assurance Committee right away. Where a CAB, a certification body, has minor non-conformities, we would ask that they conduct a root cause analysis and develop a corrective action plan that needs to be submitted to ASI. We review that, and if we're happy with that, we think the corrective action plan looks sensible and looks robust enough to address the non-conformities within the next 12 months, we would recommend the CB for approval. And in the third case, where a certification body has major non-conformities, again, a root cause analysis and corrective action plan needs to be submitted in a shorter time frame than if you only have minor non-conformities. So it needs to happen within 1 month. And we would then, in the next step, first confirm that the major non-conformities have been closed. This must happen within 3 months. And if that's the case, the CB can be recommended for approval by the Irma Assurance Committee. Next slide, please, Alan. What happens after approval? We have defined a baseline assessment frequency, which is 1 witness assessment per year. That would usually mean that we review the outcomes of the stage 1 audit remotely, and that we then witness on-site parts of the stage 2 of the first stage 2 audit of a certification body. There will be 1 surveillance office, 1 head office surveillance, there will be 1 head office surveillance assessment within the 5-year cycle of approval. And if you want to maintain approval beyond the first 5-year cycle, you need to submit your reapplication 6 months before your approval expires. And the reapproval then follows the same process as initial approval. And you should be aware that Irma will conduct regular certification body performance reviews. ASI because of our role being on site, doing witness assessments, doing head office assessments, of course, we will have a lot of insight into how the CVs operate. We might recommend sanctions to Irma if there are sustained problems, and those sanctions might comprise formal warnings, but then they would escalate if the problems continue, that we would carry out additional monitoring activities at the expense of the certification body, and you might be suspended for parts or all of your approval scope. And then finally, if things really get to the worst, then the approval would be withdrawn. Next slide, please, Ellen. To give you a flavor of the costs that you would incur for working with ASI. Yeah, this table is also in the oversight procedure. Maybe we don't have to go through all of the numbers here, but just to say, if you're going for the second option, meaning you're a non-accredited certification body, the costs would approximately be twice than if you're an accredited CV, simply because the scope of ASI assessment would be broader than if you're already accredited. Okay, next slide, please, Ellen. Now, quickly to the last option, which we want to offer in the oversight procedure as well, which is that a non-accredited certification body partners with an accredited certification body. This is also referred to as outsourcing in ISO 17021. This would avoid certification bodies or audit firms having to seek accreditation themselves. It would mean that important decisions would have to rest with the approved body. For example, decisions around scope expansion or reduction of a mine site assessment, but also the maintenance, suspension, withdrawal, or downgrading of the levels of achievement that Michelle referred to earlier, Irma transparency, Irma 50, and so on. There would have to be an agreement in place that guides the collaboration of the two bodies. So the non-approved body would also, of course, have to stick to all of the Irma requirements. We would ask that they carry out audit activities under the Irma program according to the procedures of the approved certification body. All of the personnel they use for Irma activities have to be approved by Irma, and there might be periodic internal audits by the approved certification body to ensure that the outsourcing body sticks to what they have signed up to in the contract. But also Irma and ASI might carry out periodic on-site witnessing. And as I mentioned earlier, if you enter into a partnership with an approved certification body, but you're not approved yourself and you're not accredited, you will have to promote the services you offer as in partnership with. And I'll leave it at that, Ellen and Michelle, and hope we have some time to answer any questions.
We do have a few questions. One is about the geographies that we expect to need increased auditor coverage, and I'll pick this one up first, and then Michelle and Marnie, hand back to you also if you have answers on it. But I will say first that we have increased need for auditors and attention in all the places where mining happens in the globe. It's really as diverse as that right now because we've got a broad range of customers who buy from mining companies, whether that be midpoint or end brand, as well as investors asking mining companies to do Irma audits and seeking to use Irma as one of the tools they use in their due diligence for purchasing mined materials. So, but in particular, we can see this growth in Latin America. We see it across the African continent. We see it certainly in Indonesia and across with the increased nickel there, but the US, Canada, Australia. So it's quite diverse. And Michelle or Marnie, please feel free, Michelle, especially if you see others that you really want to highlight other than what I've mentioned there. And I'll give you another. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I mean, we do have interest really globally, but you know, obviously there's uptake in the global South in particular.
We I'm going to give you one to think on for a moment, Michelle, and I'm going to answer another while you think on this one. So if you think on how an accreditation witnessed audit under 17021 differs from witness audits done by Irma. So I'm going to let you answer that in one moment. And again, that's how is an accreditation witness audit under 17021 different than an Irma witnessing of an audit? The other that I'll take while you're thinking on that one is Irma now a member of ISEAL, and how do the changes to Irma's requirements or accreditation impact their commitments to ISEAL? So Irma is not a full code compliant member in ISEAL yet. We do aspire to that. We do use the ISEAL codes to guide the decisions we're making on the systems that we're building up, whether that be standard setting or on assurance or claims that can be made against Irma's system. But so absolutely, because we are aspiring to full code compliance in ISEAL, you can expect that if ISEAL expectations are written down, we're using that as a guidebook in Irma. And Marnie has lots of experience and expertise in ISEAL expectations, as she's worked with a number of the groups who are full code compliant ISEAL members. Michelle, I'll get back to you for the other question that was there.
I actually think I'm going to have Marnie answer that question. And Marnie, do we need to repeat it for you? This is the difference. The difference between a witnessed audit under 17021 and one that's conducted for Irma. And maybe we tag team on this question, but I would like you to answer what your approach would be as ASI.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks for the question. And yes, Michelle mentioned it. We have Matthias Willenhammer, my colleague from ASI, our operations director on the line, who probably has much more experience with accreditation bodies than I do. So maybe Matthias can chime in as well. But the way we will, and we haven't done a witness assessment for Irma yet. So we're only this year really getting started, opening up the approval process. So we haven't done one yet. I guess we will also need to find our feet in all of this. But I would say that we would focus more on the actual individual auditor and activities that are not so typical in ISO audits. For example, the quality of stakeholder engagements, external stakeholder engagement, the quality of worker interviews, and focusing much more on the individual level, in particular for the witnessing. And as Michelle already said, we have a lot of, sorry, my voice is a bit thin today. We have a lot of experience with sustainability schemes. In fact, we only work with sustainability schemes. And so in particular, stakeholder engagement is a very important part that I already mentioned. But the national accreditation bodies probably have much less experience on sustainability issues, and they will be much more procedural, I would think, than ASI is. But with that, maybe I'll hand over to Matthias, who certainly has things to contribute as well.
Thank you, Marnie. I think you emphasized the differences very well. I mean, national accreditation bodies, and we work, for example, with DAX and UCAS. I myself am a qualified DAX assessor. They tend to focus more on system requirements and on the procedural level, while we really emphasize the scheme technical requirements and have focus on the credibility of certification. So our focus is a bit more technical, but the basis of application and our work is the same. It's ISO 17020.
Thanks, Matthias.
Mm-hmm. And Michelle, did you want to say something more about that when Irma witnesses an audit, what we're looking for and how that's a bit different? Yep.
So Irma also can be an observer and a witness on audits. And when we're present at audits, number one, we are actually a resource for the audit firms. So if they have questions about interpreting the standard, we're there for them. Even if we're not witnessing an audit, we're also there during audits. We can be reached by email from the audit team as well. We're also looking to observe the scope and methodology of the audit to make sure that the audit as it's being carried out is going to deliver a robust outcome that's expected by both Irma, but also that broad suite of stakeholders that we have been talking about today. So I think one of our primary missions really is to make sure that at the end of the audit, that all the work that needs to be done has been done, and that the standard has been interpreted as intended, that the scope has been appropriate, the methodology appropriate in order to meet the expectations. I see we have 2 minutes left, and I see there's a question about upcoming Irma auditor training, and I thought I would tackle that one. We are revamping our auditor training. Our training process pre-COVID was in-person training, and we recognize with a new way of working that and many options for online systems that we have the ability to evolve our training into a combination of independent virtual training and live virtual training. So in early 2024, we're going to be releasing a new training system that will include online modules and then some virtual live modules. And those will include training on Irma in general. It will include training on the assurance process, training on chapters, and then also training on the individual roles. So whether you're an environmental auditor, social auditor, lead auditor, there'll be specific training for those particular roles. And I also want to say that we do have an updated version, as Marnie mentioned, of the oversight procedure that will be posted to our website no later than the end of day tomorrow. So if you are looking to do some reading, I would hold off until that new document is posted. It's just some minor changes, mostly that incorporate this new option of being reviewed by ASI for accreditation as opposed to requiring external accreditation. And with that, I want,
yes, some of you are dropping off. So
yeah, I just want to thank everybody for attending today. We're very excited to expand our bench of auditors. We hope we've answered your questions, but if not, feel free to reach out with more questions. We are here for you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Yeah, thank you, Marnie. Take care.